Okay, we are continuing now with Chapter 2, the second part of Chapter 2, starting with this photograph of a statue of Naosuke at Konkijido Park, Hikone Castle. And so I will just read on from here, page 73 of the text. E took into account the failure to obtain imperial sanction and the opinions of the nobility to gain acceptance of the commercial treaty, showing a cautious attitude. But in the aftermath of the Arrow incident of 1856, which caused the Second Opium War between Qing China and an alliance of Britain and France, in June 1858, Ansei 5, without imperial sanction, he concluded the US-Japan Treaty of Amity and Commerce, Nichibei Shuko Tsusho Joyaku. This appeared to bring closure to the problem of external relations, but as regards national policy, kokuze, i.e. foreign policy, expulsionism or opening the country, and the national polity, kokutai, the form of the country, i.e. restoration of imperial rule and delegation of government, they became points of contention leading to turmoil and almost to civil war, nairan. A change in relations with Russia, henten suru Russia tono kanke. From this point, I would like to examine Russia's movements, which we have focused on until now, in the context of Bakumatsu diplomatic history. Russo-Japanese relations also had a great influence on expulsionism, joi, in the Bakumatsu period, so it is necessary to look carefully at the process of Russo-Japanese negotiations. Of the powers which demanded trading relations with Japan, Britain and America were late, but of course Russia was one of them. As a revenge for the Khostov incident of 1806, already mentioned in Chapter 1, in 1811, Bunker 8, the implorer and naval captain Vasily Golovnin, 1776 to 1831, of the Russian warship Diana, was detained in Japan. Then in revenge for this, in the following year, the very successful shipping agent Kaisen Donya, Takadaya Kahei, 1769 to 1827, was detained on Kunashiri Island by the Vice Captain Pyotr Rikord, 1776 to 1855. This was the so-called Golovnin incident. It was solved by Takadaya Kahei's personal efforts, and the details are in Shiba Ryotaro's novel, Nanohana no Oki. But through this series of events, the attitude of the Bakufu was hardened all the more. Trade was firmly refused, and it was declared that Russian ships were to be driven away, uchi harai. So negotiations between Russia and Japan were put on hold for about 50 years. This was a successful expulsion of Russia. After that, the Opium Wars caused the opening of several Chinese ports, and Russian trade with the interior of China received a great blow, and it was also feared the extension of Britain's influence to Japan would threaten the political situation, rights and interests, keneki, of East Asia. Again, American whaling ships reached the Russian coastal territory of the Sea of Okhotsk, but the news of Perry's ships coming was an even greater shock to Russia. With this changed situation in the background, Russia decided once again to send a mission to Japan to demand trading relations. When Perry came to Japan in 1853, Kaie 6, the Russian envoy Puchachin, 1804 to 1883, led a Russian squadron to Nagasaki, demanding the demarcation of borders, opening of ports, and trade. At first, within the shogunate, the Bakakunai, there was quite a friendly and supportive response to the Russian party, which came to Nagasaki with a moderate attitude. And there was an idea of only making a trade treaty with Russia and adopting a policy of shutting out Britain and America, which were working together. But the Councillor Mito Nariaki was fiercely opposed to this groundbreaking plan, and it was abandoned. After that, the Crimean War, 1853 to 1856, erupted, and negotiations inevitably were abandoned. But during the war, in November 1855, December of Ansei 1, a treaty of amity was concluded with Russia at Shimoda. By this treaty, three ports, Shimoda, Hakodate, and Nagasaki, were opened. The border was determined to be between the islands of Etorofu and Urup in the Kuril archipelago, Chishimaretto. Karafuto Island was to continue as an area of mixed residence as before. Furthermore, in July of 1858, Ansei 5, Puchachin was able to sign an unequal treaty without customs or tariff autonomy, the Russo-Japanese Treaty of Amity and Commerce. In February 1861, Manen II changed to Bunkyu 1 on February 19th. The friendly Russo-Japanese relations broke down, and the danger of a violation of Japan's sovereignty was exposed when a Russian warship occupied Tsushima Island between Kyushu and Korea. With no permission from the Japanese government, the Russian naval First Lieutenant Nikolai Birilev on the warship corvette Posadnik sailed to Tsushima Island, demanding leasehold land, and refused to leave. Russian soldiers attacked a guardhouse and looted weapons and food, kidnapped and killed residents, and committed violent acts. There was no end to the trouble with local people, and the Tsushima clan or domain was placed in a very difficult position. The Bakufu was at a loss to find a valid way of resolving the situation, but the British minister Rutherford Alcock, 1809 to 1897, declared to the elder Ando Nobumasa, 1819 to 1871, that Britain would need no request from the Bakufu to force the Russians to withdraw, even using force if necessary. Alcock judged that if the situation was left alone, there was a danger that Russia would annex Japan, and even if it was just one piece of territory, this would be a great blow to Britain's policy in East Asia. So he advised the Bakufu that if Russia would not withdraw, Britain would occupy Tsushima by force of arms. The possibility that trouble, Funso, would break out between Britain and Russia with Japan as the setting caused a feeling of tension to prevail. As a result, even though the Posadnik finally withdrew 6 months later in August of the same year, 1861, under British pressure, it was clear that the Bakufu had abandoned Tsushima, which was vital for national defense. Moreover, the Bakufu had no stratagem to defeat the Russians, and the fact that they invited the intervention of the British dealt a fatal blow, Chimeisho, to their military power. Also, within the Tsushima clan or domain, this caused the policy of conquering Russia by military force, Seikanron, to originate as a positive policy for defending Japan. Going a bit further, in the middle of the 19th century, Russia lost the Crimean War, and the absolute imperial authority of the Romanov dynasty began to become unstable. Inside the country, a mindset of enlightenment and freedom arose, and by the emancipation of the serfs, Nodo Kaiho, reform towards a modern people and state were aimed for. On the other hand, to divert attention from social unrest and setbacks in expansion in the western part of Asia, Russia again began to lay stress on southward expansion in East Asia. Through the Treaty of Peking, 1860, Russia obtained from China the maritime province of Primorsky Krai, Primorye Enkaishu in Japanese, and built the port of Vladivostok, which became an important port in East Asia since it was ice-free at least for part of the year. Then, since it was important to defend the port, it was planned to occupy the whole of the island of Sakhalin, Karafuto. After the Meiji Restoration, the first government was the Grand Council of State, Dajokan, which did not intend to abandon the whole of Sakhalin, Karafuto, and asserted that all the land south of the 50th parallel, 50-degree circle of latitude, was Japanese territory. However, the climate was poor, and it was realized that the land was barren and hard to develop, so it was felt in the main that all efforts should be concentrated on Hokkaido. To begin with, at the time, Japan's stage of capitalism was such that it was unable to develop the natural resources of Sakhalin. So, in 1875, Meiji 8, by the Treaty of St. Petersburg, Karafuto Chishima Kokan Joyaku, Sakhalin and the Kuril Islands were exchanged, so all of the Kurils became Japanese territory, and all of Sakhalin, which until that time had been an area of mixed residence, became Russian. This treaty was the first one in which the small and weak country of Japan negotiated with one of the Western powers on an equal basis, and an agreement was reached. Also, the Russian agreement to abandonment of the Kuril Islands was a major concession, and Japan's acquisition of the rights to fish in northern waters and other special rights can be regarded as a diplomatic success. But after this, relations with Russia worsened steadily over the Korean peninsula. It is beyond the scope of this book, but the Russo-Japanese War, 1904 to 05, broke out about 30 years later. The worldview of the shogunate, Bakkakutachi no Sekaikan. After the coming of Perry, the shogunate, Bakkaku, was engaged in the difficult control of Bakumatsu diplomacy, making efforts to conclude treaties of amity, Washin Joyaku, and of commerce, Tsusho Joyaku. In other words, Abe Masahiro, Hotta Masayoshi, Naosuke, Iwase Tadanari, and others have all been portrayed as avoiding expulsionism and supporters of the opening of the country, Kai Kokushugisha. But what is the truth of the matter? Here I want to investigate this question. Before doing this, let us talk about the general awareness of foreign or external matters, taigai ninshiki, of the samurai class, bushi kaikyu. The key to this is late Mito studies. In accordance with East Asian Chinese suprematist and expulsionist thought, Chinese Hua Yi, Japanese Kai Shiso, this placed the emperor at the center, and it caused the sudden rise of revere the emperor, expel the barbarians thinking. But this thinking assumed the feudal system as a premise, and skillfully affirmed the shogunate and the daimyos, shoko. The bakufu, shogunate, respected the court, and the daimyos worshipped the bakufu, and the retainers, kashin, respected the daimyos. This was the logic. Late Mito studies developed theories about vertical hierarchy, joge no chitsujoron, supplemented the Tokugawa public order system, and guaranteed the legitimacy, seitose, of the delegation of authority from emperor to shogun, taisei inin. The samurai class of the time was, to a greater or lesser extent, influenced by this thought. In other words, they were expulsionists. The shogunate, Bakumatsu, did not exclude this either, and expulsionism was at its foundation. Abe Masahiro and Naosuke were also controlled by this thinking. So let us examine the awareness of foreign or external matters, taigai ninshiki, of the shogunate one by one. Abe Masahiro was the seventh head of the Fukuyama clan and is generally thought to have promoted an enlightened policy of opening the country. But in fact, Abe frequently questioned whether the Muninen Uchiharai Rei edict should not be restored, appointed Mito Tokugawa Nariaki to be an advisor on maritime defense, Kaibo Sanyo, etc., and seems to have pursued a policy of expulsionism, Joi Hoshin. Indeed, he put a brake on commercial treaties and postponed the true opening of the country. On the other hand, Abe established maritime defense, Kaibo Gakakari, planned many appointments of talented people to high office, and prepared for upcoming tough external negotiations with foreigners. In fact, Iwase Tadanari and others promoted by Abe cut their way through the difficult negotiations for commercial treaties. With regard to Abe's hopes for the restoration of the Muninen Uchiharai Rei expulsion edict, it was in opposition to maritime defense, and he gave it up. But it may have been part of Abe's deliberate calculations to call for the restoration of the edict. In other words, that was not his true intention, but merely a performance to deflect the discontent of Nariaki and others of the die-hard expulsionist faction, Joi Kyoko-ha. The author is basically in agreement with this opinion. Abe had a sense of balance in his management of the political situation, and even if he was truly an expulsionist, he certainly did not intend to support the extreme Muninen Uchiharai Rei expulsion edict. If this were not true, he would not have been able to promote Iwase and others. Abe handed over the position of head of the elders, Roju Shuza, to Hotta Masayoshi. He left the diplomacy to his successor and became a regulatory valve, Chosei-ben, to control the opposition in order to assist Hotta. After Abe's death, it was the elder Roju, Hotta Masayoshi, who strove to conclude the commercial treaties. He was the fifth head of the Sakura clan in what is now Chiba Prefecture, and after working as a temple and shrine magistrate, Jishabugyo, and an Osaka castle official, etc., in 1837, Tempo 8, he was appointed as an elder or senior councillor for the first time. In 1843, Tempo 14, after a conflict with Mizuno Tadakuni, he resigned, but in 1855, Ansei II, on Abe's recommendation, he was reappointed as an elder, and after that he became seriously involved in negotiations with Townsend Harris. He also recommended Tokugawa Yoshinobu as the successor, Keishi, to the shogun, with the intention of placating the court which favored Yoshinobu. Hotta had confidence that he would obtain imperial sanction for the treaties, but he himself went to Kyoto and failed to obtain it. And while he was in Kyoto, by the maneuvering of the elder Matsudaira Tadakata and others, Naosuke of the Nanki faction, which supported Kishu, a Tokugawa branch family, Yoshitomi, later the 14th shogun Iemochi, was appointed chief minister, Tairo. Then Hotta, as a member of the Hitotsubashi faction, was ostracized and dismissed from the post of elder. Incidentally, as head of his clan or domain, Hotta strongly promoted Dutch studies, Rangaku, and organized education for Dutch studies inside the domain residence, Hante. He also employed the doctor of Dutch medicine, Sato Taizen, who founded the Juntendo, later Juntendo University, to the extent that he was ridiculed by people around him. From this personal history, it is clear that Hotta was more strongly in favor of opening the country than Abe. However, in fact, Hotta had received a great deal of influence from Iwase, and traveling widely in the world through trade, he would become a leader, make up for Japan's shortcomings, nurture the country's power, and strengthen its military might. Bakumatsu Gaikoku Kankei Bunsho. So he would use the profits of trade to make Japan into a strong military nation. In addition, he would gradually make foreigners obey Japanese virtue and authority, itoku. And finally, the nations of the world, through peerless government, would receive benefits from and respect Japan as the great leader of the whole world, and it is necessary to implement this stratagem. He advocated the seizing of supremacy on a world scale and the construction of a great Oriental empire, Daichuka Teikoku. Behind Hotta's enlightenment, there was expulsionism based on a powerful national learning, kokugaku, and late Mito studies, Koki Mitogaku. He regarded commercial treaties as a necessary evil, hitsuyo aku, to build up the military strength, bubi jujitsu, of Japan. Regarding Naosuke, he is well known to readers, so I will not say much about him, but he is generally said to have been strongly in favor of opening the country. In 2008, Heisei 20, it was 150 years since the concluding of the treaties of commerce, and a celebration of this, Naosuke to Kaikoku Hyakugoju Nensai, was held in Hikone City, Shiga Prefecture. The concept was a reappraisal of Naosuke, head of the Hikone clan, who led the opening of Japan, and by opening the ports opened the door to trade and cultural exchange with foreign countries on the occasion of the 150th anniversary of the conclusion of the treaties of commerce. But in reality, Naosuke was cautious until the end about the conclusion of the commercial treaties. To the plenipotentiary Iwase Tadanari, he said that if he was in a dilemma, kyushitabai, he could sign the treaty, and so this was done. What must be carefully noted is that I's resolution and his awareness were all within the framework of the Tokugawa public order system, Tokugawa Kogi Taisei. In other words, since the merciful and loving humanitarian policy, Bujutsu Seisaku, had to be abandoned, Japan was forced to sign the treaties as a temporary stopgap measure, Ichiji Shinogide. But as soon as military preparations were complete, they would be revoked. So it was only a temporary departure from the policy of Sakoku. This was mostly an expedient, hoben, of the court, but Naosuke's true intentions were to strengthen Japan's naval power, which meant approving the commercial treaties for the time being. Iwase Tadanari, the true benefactor of the opening of Japan, Shin no Kaikoku no Onjin, Iwase Tadanari. Finally, let us examine the foreign awareness, Taigai Ninshiki, of Iwase Tadanari, 1818 to 1861, who was the true promoter of the commercial treaties. Iwase, as an inspector, Metsuke, coastal defense official, Kaibo Gakakari, and foreign magistrate, Gaikoku Bugyo, led all of the negotiations with the 5 countries who signed the Ansei treaties and signed them all. The true benefactor responsible for the opening of Japan was not Naosuke, but Iwase Tadanari, a man forgotten by history. Iwase was the grandson of Hayashi Jussai, 1768 to 1841, whose ancestor was the great scholar Hayashi Razan, 1583 to 1657. Iwase was an outstanding pupil at the Shoheizaka School, Shoheiko, and in 1854, Kaie 7, he was promoted from lower-ranked official, Kachigashira, to inspector, Metsuke, financial official, Kattegakari, and coastal defense official, Kaibo Gakakari, foreign magistrate, Gaikoku Bugyo, and building construction and repair official, Sakuji Bugyo. His official rank went from 5th Iiga no Kami in 1855 to Higo no Kami. And here's image number 9 with Iwase Tadanari in the back row on the left. This is when he was a Commissioner of Foreign Affairs, and it's from the Victoria and Albert Museum. Under the elder Abe, he opened the military school, Kobusho, the Institute for Researching Barbarian Books, Bansho Shirabesho, and the Nagasaki Naval Training School, Kaigun Denshujo. He also constructed the Shinagawa gun battery, Daiba, and when the Russian envoy Puchachin's ship Diana was lost in the Ansei Tokai earthquake of 1854, he organized the construction of a replacement vessel at Heda in Numazu City, Shizuoka Prefecture. It was a perfect chance for him and others to learn shipbuilding techniques. He sent bakufu retainers and also gave permission for clan members to go to the shipyard. He further ordered the shipwrights, funadaiku, at Heda to learn the techniques of shipbuilding and to build a Western-style vessel immediately called a Kimisawa-gata. These shipwrights would later play a central role in building coastal vessels and later in building Japanese naval vessels. Iwase was the member of the shogunate with the highest reputation of all amongst people of his generation. He was highly praised by colleagues in the shogunate as having experience far greater than ordinary people, with most excellent intelligence and capacity, with all the qualities needed by a politician. Fukuchi Ochi, Bakumatsu Seijika, politicians of the Bakumatsu. He was very acute from birth, and his intelligence was outstanding. His calligraphy, shoga, and art, bunge, were excellent. Kimura Yoshitake, Bakufu Meishi Shoden, short biographies of famous people from the shogunate. Again, the remarkable man of the Bakumatsu, Hashimoto Sanai, who hardly ever praised anybody, wrote, living up to his fame with nothing shameful about him, with a splendid strategy in his mind, he is a truly impressive person. Part omitted. His actions are quick like rapids and powerful like a strong fountain or spring. And in keeping with his ability, his energy seems substantial. He is decisive and scholarly, and indeed he is an admirable man. Hashimoto Keigaku Zenshu, complete works of Hashimoto Keigaku or Sannai. Townsend Harris, who had directly negotiated with Iwase, told Fukuchi Ochi, whom he met in America in 1871, Meiji 4, Iwase was very smart, and he frequently pointed out contradictions in his, that is, Harris's, arguments, making it difficult to answer. And when he was refuted by Iwase, he was forced to revise his point and many articles of the US-Japan Treaty of Amity, Bakumatsu Seijika. In short, Iwase was a man to be feared, osoru beshi. Furthermore, it is said that Iwase Tadanari and others signed commercial treaties which were unequal, and they are criticized for their ignorance and inexplicable actions. However, it is quite impossible to agree with this opinion. In the first place, Iwase, as a diplomat in June 1857, Ansei 4, had requested to go to Hong Kong to investigate the state of trade. This idea was extraordinarily unique. It was opposed by a group of accounting magistrates, Kanjo Bugyo, and auditors, Kanjo Ginmiyaku. The shogunate could not come to a conclusion, and in the end, the final decision was left to the shogun Iesada. If this had been realized, maybe the negotiations with Harris would have gone more favorably for Japan. With regard to unilateral consular jurisdiction, extraterritoriality, Chigai Hoken, the Japanese side accepted it with almost no discussion. But to explain why it was recognized so easily, it is necessary to refer to the situation which existed previously. At that time, it was forbidden by the state for Japanese to go overseas. Trade in practice meant dealings with foreign ships in Japanese ports. And it was not foreseen, sote gai, that Japanese merchants would seek to do business overseas. In other words, at this stage, travel overseas was inconceivable, so there was no perceived necessity to consider consular jurisdiction. On the other hand, there were very strict regulations regarding the excursions of foreigners. Unlike the Chinese, mixed residence in the interior was strictly forbidden, and the foreigners, Europeans and Americans, were not allowed to go further from the foreign settlement, the concession, Kyoryuchi, than a distance of 10 ri from the open port, about 40 kilometers. The foreigners were shut in the settlement, and it was very rare for Japanese other than merchants to have contact with them. Furthermore, the Yokohama settlement was designed just like Dejima in Nagasaki as an isolated space. It is not clear to what degree Iwase and others were aware of consular jurisdiction, extraterritoriality, but in this way, Japanese and foreigners had been carefully, yoi shuto ni, isolated to avoid the possibility of strife between them. With regard to tariff autonomy, Kanzei Jishuken, the commercial treaties had determined the export tariff to be a uniform 5%, while the import tariff was divided into 4 categories. 1, gold and silver, kingin, and necessities for living in the settlement, kyoryu-min no seikatsu hitsujuhin, were not taxed. 2, marine supplies, senpaku yohin, food and coal were taxed at 5%. 3, alcohol was taxed at 35%. 4, everything else, being the overwhelming majority of items, was taxed at 20%. In other words, the import tariff when the commercial treaties were concluded was generally set at 20%. At that time, Britain, which was called the factory of the world, was the champion of free trade, Jiu Boeki Shugi. And with its colonies, it maintained import and export tariffs of only 5%, With its overwhelming industrial and military power in the background, it imported raw materials at low prices and distributed its manufactured goods at low prices throughout the world. At that time, the Japanese feared that their country might become a British colony, but in fact, Britain had absolutely no such desire, and as long as trade could be organized to run smoothly, the British were content with that. On the other hand, if the commercial treaties were not properly observed, Britain did not shrink from taking stern measures. However, Britain was a rarity among the nations of the world, most of which espoused protectionism, hogo boeki shugi. Taking the example of America, even though it had experienced the Industrial Revolution, at this stage it was still not sufficiently industrialized, and it was also lagging far behind as an imperialist state. With its frail foundation as a state as an excuse, it was quite unable to realize the principles of free trade and maintained an import tariff of 30%. This was similar to the Japanese figure of 20% and was not completely unequal. A literally unequal treaty, Fubodo Joyaku, was created on May 13, 1866, KO2, when a revised treaty was concluded between Japan and the representatives of Britain, America, France, and the Netherlands. All import tariffs were revised to a uniform 5%, causing many cheap goods to flow in. And with the closed ports policy of the Bakufu, a remarkable surplus of goods built up. As well as the imbalance in the international trade balance of payments, shushi, which resulted, Japan's development of industrial capital was greatly hindered. The revised treaty was concluded to reduce by 2/3 the indemnity which was payable to the four allied nations after their fleets bombarded Shimonoseki in 1864, and which was the bill for the expulsionist activity starting in the Bunkyu period. This expulsionism was very costly. As shown above, Iwase's commercial treaty was certainly not an unequal one. The truth is that subsequent expulsionism, joi, caused it to be revised into an unequal treaty. Then the lower-ranked samurai of the Choshu and Satsuma clans or domains, which had promoted the expulsionist movement, joi undo, became bureaucrats in the Meiji era. Leaving their own actions on one side, it was they who criticized the diplomatic policy of the Bakufu as weak-willed. Yet if they had not concealed Iwase's achievements and denied them, they would have been in no position to make this criticism. And this view of history devised by the Choshu and Satsuma clans still prevails unchallenged to this day. It is certainly not appropriate to disrespect Iwase Tadanari and others of the shogunate who had noble motives, suko no kokorozashi, and who, while privately maintaining expulsionist thought, prevented Japan from becoming a colony and opened it with the intention of leaping into the future, arming the country and creating a rich country with a strong army. Fukoku Kyohei. Conquering the whole world and hoisting the Japanese flag, Zensekai wo seifuku shite Hinomaru wo uchitateru. Iwase was also an expulsionist based on East Asian-style Chinese or Oriental expulsionism. He wished to hoist the Japanese flag widely in the world, i.e. seize dominion over the world. Matsuoka Hideo, Iwase Tadanari, and in the place of the emperor, his Japanese vassals should teach loyalty and faithfulness, part of Japan's culture, to the very greedy and cruel barbarians and make the emperor the only sovereign in the world. So joi is not merely expelling the foreigner, but it's quite imperialist. In other words, representing the emperor, his purpose was to educate the foreigners, barbarians, iteki, in Japan's virtues of loyalty and faithfulness, conquering the whole world and hoisting the Japanese flag. On the other hand, he concluded commercial treaties and stressed the need to make profits from them with the aim of arming the country. Beyond this, he advocated the founding of an expulsionist empire which would rule the world. Iwase pursued these beliefs and urged the conclusion of a series of treaties by Japan. Furthermore, for the conclusion of commercial treaties, Iwase thought it was necessary to investigate foreign countries and asked permission to go to Hong Kong, and was advised by Harris to have the treaty ratified in Washington. The former plan failed due to the opposition of the accounting magistrates. The latter plan was realized, but at that time Iwase was under house arrest, eichikyo, so he passed that honor to Katsukaishu. With regard to the location of ports to be opened, there were many opinions, but there was general agreement that they should be far from Edo. But Iwase was alone in preferring Yokohama, and he influenced the maritime defense officials in that direction. Iwase's aim was to establish an economic zone comprising Edo and Yokohama and break the stranglehold of Osaka on the economic structures of Japan. This would allow the Bakufu to monopolize wealth and take the lead in building up the nation's military power, weapons. It was indeed a major political measure. So Yokohama City and the country Samurai Research Association, Kyodoshi Kenkyu Kai, decided to erect a memorial and publish a biography to show Iwase as the benefactor who caused the port of Yokohama to be opened. Really rather an important man, Iwase. The rational and positive nature of Iwase's vision, the clarity of his ideas about enhancing the shogunate, and the splendor of his concepts all had the power to attract many people. The elder Hotta was also greatly charmed by Iwase, appointing him as a brain, or an expert, not only with regard to diplomatic problems, but also political movements, asking him to do many things. Iwase himself said, from the conclusion of this treaty of amity and commerce between Japan and America, unexpected disasters may be triggered, and the existence of the Tokugawa family, the Bakufu, may even be threatened. But even if it is hard to divulge anything about this, persons in a high position in the state in such a crisis must resolve to place the state of Japan above the Bakufu. In other words, the state, Shashoku, was more important than the Bakufu. These ideas were inherited in the pedigree of the Bakkaku. The argument in the Bunkyu period of Okubo Tadahiro Ichio about the return of government to the emperor, Taisei Hokan, Katsukaishu's contact with the influential Western clans, etc. Iwase's foresight should be noted. Okubo was a colleague of Iwase, and Katsu came in contact with him when he was at the Nagasaki Naval Training School. They were directly influenced by Iwase and his civilized and progressive thought. The early death of Iwase with his work unfinished, Kokorozashi Nakaba de Sosei Suru. After he had concluded the Ansei treaties with 5 countries, what lay in store for Iwase was suppression by the chief minister, Tairo Naosuke. The direct cause of Iwase being viewed with suspicion by Ii was his political movements in support of Hitotsubashi Yoshinobu to be the next shogun. But Ii also no doubt feared Iwase's outstanding brilliance, clear-headedness, kaimese. Again, Iwase was capable of confronting Ii and denouncing him, which was something which the authoritarian Ii could not permit. The daimyo of the Tosa clan or domain, Yamauchi Yodo, 1827 to 1872, strongly urged Hotta Masayoshi to make efforts somehow to free Iwase from his banishment, Suiho, because without him the negotiations with America would become bogged down. The daimyo of the Fukui clan or domain, Matsudaira Shungaku, 1828 to 1890, shared Yamauchi's opinion, and several wise princes, Kenko, did their best to rescue him. However, after Iwase was demoted to the rank of building, construction, and repair official, Sakuji Bugyo, in 1859, Ansei 6, he was placed under house arrest, and only 2 years later, in 1861, Bunkyu 1, he died in despair from an illness. The cause of death was not obvious, but it may well have been frustration, uppun, which built up during his period of house arrest. Naosuke, by hounding Iwase to a premature grave, in the end managed to shorten the life of the Bakufu itself. When one considers that the Metsuke inspectors and Kaibo Gakari, officials in charge of coastal defense, who had been suppressed together with Iwase, were later all reinstated at the same time and left a great legacy, Okina Sokuseki, Iwase's early death seems all the more regrettable. As has been shown above, the worldview of the shogunate, the Bakkaku, which concluded treaties of amity and of commerce, was entirely based on an expulsionism, Joi Shiso, controlled by East Asian or Chinese or Oriental expulsionism, Higashi Asia-teki Kai Shiso. At first sight, this expulsionism seemed to be the opposite, i.e. opening the country, Kaikoku Shugi, but this openness was no more than a temporary expedient on the way to conquering the world later on. Opening the country was to build up profits through trade and invest them in arming the country. It was a positive but inevitable strategy. Yamuo enai senryaku. And that is the end of chapter 2. This is chapter 3 about Sakamoto Ryoma, which I will read later. Thank you very much. And now I shall stop the share. And here I am. I hope you are enjoying this, and I welcome any comments that you have in the chat. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. See you later. Bye.